Arizona Wildlife Views, brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects made possible by the Sportfish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Find birds. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Arizona Wildlife Views. I'm your host, Jim Harkin. On the show tonight, we take you around the state and introduce you to some of Arizona's interesting wildlife, beginning with the endangered Chiricahua leopard frog. They are, by all accounts, just another little member of Arizona's animal community. But sadly, they are also one of the victims of man's influence upon the landscape. The Chiricahua leopard frog was once common along the Mogollon Rim in the White Mountains and the Sky Islands of southeastern Arizona. But in the 1970s, their numbers began to decline drastically.
Amphibian populations worldwide have declined dramatically to a point where many scientists are very alarmed at the future of many, many species of the 6,000 or so that are known to humankind right now, to a point where we may have a very small fraction of that 6,000 species left after this decline actually plays itself out. The Chiricahua leopard frog is one of those species that has declined as a result of a multitude of factors: habitat destruction, introduced species, disease, and the recent drought that Arizona has been in over the last decade or so are probably the four most important factors for leading to declines of Chiricahua leopard frog populations.
Now it's up to biologists like Mike Schredel and his team to try to restore the balance of nature and help the Chiricahua leopard frog survive in its natural habitat. And like everything in nature, it is no simple task. First, you have to find their remaining fertilized eggs in the wild and then take them to a facility like Bubbling Pond's fish hatchery, which has converted one of its buildings into a frog hatchery.
We brought in egg masses from the wild, so we're taking advantage of the natural genetic diversity of wild populations. This egg mass was brought to Bubbling Ponds, where they hatched into tadpoles, and actually some have metamorphosed into little froglets. And the reason we head start is that the probability in the wild of a tiny little amphibian egg making it to a reproductive adult is somewhere around 10%, very small percentage. Now, when we bring that same egg into a captive situation, we can have 90% survivorship to a reproductive age. So we're actually creating many more individuals to release to many more sites. And our objective is to establish enough populations so the Chiricahua leopard frog no longer needs the protection of the Endangered Species Act and can be delisted from that act.
Meanwhile, as the tadpoles are developing at the hatchery, work in the field is going on to renovate their habitat. There's not much point in raising frogs if you don't have anywhere to put them once they're grown.
This small spring near Payson was renovated a year and a half ago, and cooperators from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the Phoenix Zoo came up here, and we installed these log structures here that have deepened the pools behind me and have created beautiful habitat for Chiricahua leopard frogs and their tadpoles. The tadpoles, of course, if you remember from your high school biology, live in the water, and they need to they feed, and they're wholly aquatic. Once they metamorphose into air-breathing frogs, then they will forage in the vegetation behind me, and it'll actually be a very wonderful little frog habitat and a haven for Chiricahua leopard frogs.
And there are many small sites like this spread along the natural springs and creeks in the White Mountains, Mogollon Rim, and southeastern Arizona. The renovations of these sites would be impossible without many cooperating partners.
This small spring is located on Tonto National Forest, who has been an exceptional partner in Chiricahua leopard frog conservation and recovery. And this small spring at one time was one of the few populations in this region of Chiricahua leopard frogs. And despite its smallness, it was a very reproductive population. But over time, it became silted in with mud from runoff and growth of vegetation encroaching on the open water that Chiricahua leopard frogs need to reproduce and complete their life cycle. So we went in and we renovated it with partners from the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Phoenix Zoo. And we removed a lot of the soft muds and made a deeper water column. We lined it to make it more permanent. So Chiricahua leopard frogs need year-round water, as do their tadpoles. And then we did a few other small things, such as put some protective fencing around it, because even though we like to have naturally functioning populations, at a certain point we need to take a little extra precaution, especially when we're dealing with one of the few populations in the region. So we put a hog wire fence around it, which is a little unsightly, and we plan on removing that at a later date once this population gets well established.
Being a wildlife biologist with a passion for his work, Mike sometimes needs to improvise when necessary.
At one point, we knew of only two male frogs, two male Chiricahua leopard frogs from this small spring. And I actually had them at my house over one winter because we didn't have captive facilities available at the time.
While the renovation work is going on in the field, back at the hatchery, the tadpoles and froglets are being prepared for their long trip back to the wild, which of course is not a simple process either.
We collected the tadpoles and frogs from these raceways at Bubbling Ponds, and currently they're soaking in a medication to treat them of a deadly fungal disease that has affected the world's amphibian populations. This disease, or the pathogen of this disease, is called Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. However, BD will suffice as a much shorter, easier to pronounce name. The adult frogs are soaking in a medication that is not too dissimilar from John Madden's Tufactin Tinactin that you spray on your feet for athlete's foot. And the tadpoles are soaking in a slightly different medication. The reason we do that is we want to put out frogs to the wild that are healthy and disease-free. Once the frogs are treated for the disease, we're going to package them up. The frogs get packaged in small little Gladware containers with a nice moist substrate, and the tadpoles will be put in large coolers which will have aerators, and they'll be bubbling oxygen through the water.
Then it is time to load up the truck and make that long trek from the hatchery to the newly renovated creeks along the rim country.
Reestablishing frog populations is an effort done by many cooperators, including Tonto National Forest, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Phoenix Zoo, our own Bubbling Ponds fish hatchery. Different partners will cooperate on different aspects of the project, from habitat renovation that Tonto National Forest has done, to other aspects of introductions that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other logistical factors in helping us get the frogs out to the wild. And the Phoenix Zoo and Bubbling Ponds have been tremendous help in rearing frogs from eggs to small tadpoles or frogs.
Once on site, the tadpoles and frogs were given about an hour to acclimate to the water temperature and chemistry of the creek. Creek water was added to the coolers which held the tadpoles, and the frogs, encased in their Gladware carriers, were placed into the creek to cool. Another batch of Chiricahua leopard frogs was released in this same spot previously, and they seem to be doing well.
Just in a walkthrough minutes ago, I saw several Chiricahua leopard frogs sunning themselves on the banks right over here. And they look just wonderful, nice and good body proportions. They put on a lot of size since we released them, which was about a year and a half ago or so. And so far, things are looking really great at this spring.
Finally, it is time to complete this cycle of their life and begin a new one. From an egg mass collected in the wild to hatchery-reared adolescents, they are now ready to go grow to adulthood back in the stream they originally came from. The goal of all this work is to reestablish the population of Chiricahua leopard frogs to a point where they are self-sustaining and can be removed from the endangered species list.
Delisting is something that I hope that within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have a better idea of how much more work will need to be done in order for the frog to be delisted. We need to have what are called metapopulations of frogs in each of 8 recovery units. And these recovery units are in Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. And we need to have 2 metapopulations. And think of a metapopulation as a series of ponds that are connected by dispersal corridors. It sounds like a very technical term, but it's really a rather simple thing to look at on the landscape. We need to have 2 of these metapopulations, as well as 1 isolated robust population, and that isolated robust population is a hedge against catastrophe or large or disease. So within each recovery unit, and the recovery unit we're going to is essentially the Mogollon Rim. So a little bit east of here, Camp Verde, stretching all the way over to about the White Mountains. So if you know that area, that is the former historical range of Chiricahua leopard frog. One piece of the former historical range of the Chiricahua leopard frog.
A lot of people may ask, why? Why bother saving these little frogs at all? Like we said earlier, there are no simple answers.
A lot of people ask, what good are Chiricahua leopard frogs, or any frog for that matter? Well, frogs are important indicators of the health of ecosystems. They've got moist, permeable skin that is susceptible to pollutants in the water or pollutants in the air, because really frog skin is an organ such as our lungs, and they actually breathe through and take in nutrients and other important elements through their skin. They are also important predators, competitors, and members of many ecosystems in which they're found. In one ecosystem where they're measured, there are actually more amphibian biomass than even breeding birds. They're important bioindicators. They are potential sources of medicines beneficial for humans, and they play an important role in the ecosystem of our planet Earth.
Thanks to the work and the research of department biologists, the future is looking brighter for the Chiricahua leopard frog. Do the Canada geese in your neighborhood park act like their wild counterparts? That's just one of the questions that department biologists are trying to answer. And here we are today at Chaparral Park, and we are literally on a wild goose chase. We are out here at the beginning of a 2-year study. They're banding geese, they're putting on neck collars, they're putting on leg collars to find out why these geese are staying at this lake. Some of these winter visitors, they never left.
Numbers of geese have increased very rapidly over the last few years to where now we have a few hundred geese, whereas recent as about 10 years ago, they were a matter of just a couple of dozen geese. There are concerns about these geese because they're staying year-round. They've discovered that Scottsdale is a 5-star resort. Everything they need is here. They've got food, they've got water, and there are no predators. In fact, it's just resort living here in Scottsdale for these geese. The beginning of this 2-year study starts with capturing these geese to identify them individually and put collars around their necks to identify the individual bird. They also have bands on their legs, and then we're also determining whether it's an adult, juvenile, male, or female.
Well, that sounds simple enough, but when working with wildlife, nothing's ever that easy. Geese fly, people don't. So exactly how does one catch a bird that can simply fly away? We wait until the molt. Molting is that 8 to 10 week flightless period when Canada geese shed their outer wing feathers and regrow new ones. Here in the desert Southwest, molting typically occurs between late May through June. Most birds actually remain flightless through July. During this molting period, geese will gather on ponds or lakes since they provide a safe resting place and security from predators. In the wild, geese without young will sometimes travel hundreds of miles to the security of favored molting areas in the north. Unless, of course, they decide to stay at a 5-star resort like Chaparral Lake. The plan here was to erect a small pen, bait the geese in, and simply close the gate on them. Again, nothing is ever simple when dealing with wildlife. In this case, guess who came for breakfast? You got it. Every pigeon in a 5-mile radius heard about the victuals being passed out at the park, and they came in for a free sample. Feeding wildlife is never a good idea. It concentrates animals in densities that are seldom seen in nature, exposing them to disease and predation. Also, when animals become dependent on humans, it often causes human-wildlife conflicts. But since many of these urban geese are used to feeding, we use that technique here for the capture. Eventually, the first group of geese made their way to the pen. Today's capture marks the start of a 2-year study to determine movement patterns of these geese during the day, week to week, or even month to month throughout the year. We're attempting to gain data that will lead to the development of a good urban waterfowl management plan. Eventually, the first group of geese made their way into the pen. While these cowboys will never earn their spurs rounding up geese, they did learn that slow and easy was the way to go. And oh yeah, keep an eye out for the pigeons making a hasty departure. Once inside, the pen was closed and sections of fence were removed to make the pen smaller.
Yeah, Kevin, do you mind if we take photos? How many do you want?
Goslings that tried to follow Mom into the pen were removed to safety.
It'll be interesting to watch these geese also in the wintertime when the migrating geese come in and start to intermingle and see what happens in terms of an interaction with these now domesticated geese and the wild populations that come in.
So what's the problem with the wild and urban geese interacting?
Well, that's okay to interact a little bit, but there's the problem sometimes that there might be some disease exposure between the two populations.
The next group wasn't as gullible. Like their wild country cousins have been doing for generations, these city slickers hightailed it to the safety of the island. Enter the kayaks. Sneaking up from the opposite side of the island, the remaining geese were herded off the island and into the hands of the waiting goose wranglers.
You're good, right there.
Once the last of the geese were in the pens, the biologists got to do what biologists love to do. In this case, a goose would be removed from the pen, taken over to the waiting biologists, and the processing began. The first step in the processing is to determine the age and sex of the goose.
Another female.
Once that is completed, a leg band is secured and neck band identification attached. The neck bands are attached loose enough that they don't constrict movement and growth, but tight enough that they won't slip off the bird. Those high contrast necklaces will allow observers to determine individual birds from a distance away, which will certainly help once the flight feathers grow back. Local residents were concerned about what was happening to their geese, and relieved to find that the birds were being released after the information was gathered.
Consensus is just what's going on. We love our geese. It's so good to see you out here. You know, it's just exciting for them too, I think, to see something going on, and certainly having Game and Fish involved adds a lot of credibility to the project. So, you know, we have the opportunity to talk to them about how we're trying to be very good stewards in our park environment, and so how we're trying to take care of the park for them as well as for the wildlife. And we're hoping that by monitoring, tracking the activities, behaviors, locations of the geese over the next 2 years, that Game and Fish will be able to lead us into a good urban waterfowl management program so that we can balance the needs of our wildlife population with our urban human population and work together to create the optimal urban park experience for both wildlife and people.
Our urban waterways are a great place to see all kinds of birds, and one area known as Tres Rios is one of the best. So tonight, the Arizona Wildlife Viewing Guide leads us to that unique wetlands just 13 miles southwest of Phoenix.
Think of the Valley of the Sun as the Valley of the Three Rivers. Water from the Salt, Verde, and Gila rivers drew the first settlers to the area. Before Phoenix was a city and Arizona was a state, the Salt and Gila rivers flowed freely through the Valley of the Sun. Those waters nourished animal and plant life along the river's banks and created a rich natural environment. While there have been many changes to the riverways, there are still lush riparian areas to be found, especially the Basin Meridian Wildlife Area, 17 miles west of Phoenix at 115th Avenue and the Gila River. Here the river is filled with natural flow, groundwater, and yes, water from wastewater treatment plants upriver. Home to abundant wildlife, the area boasts over 150 species of birds, not to mention mammals, fish, reptiles, and amphibians. It's also home to the Tres Rios Nature and Earth Festival, an annual 2-day outdoor event that focuses on the rich diversity of wildlife, habitat, history, and culture of the Gila River drainage.
And we want to thank everyone for coming out to Tres Rios Nature and Earth Festival. Visit our fine vendors around. Some of them are selling you things, some of them are telling you things, and it's wonderful to see them all.
It's a great opportunity for the whole family to enjoy a beautiful spring day and learn something about the place we call home.
So while you're down here, take some advantage of it and come back often. You can come down when there's nothing going on. It is managed by the Arizona Game and Fish Department, and that means it's open to the public. Foggy Mountain Breakdown, here we go.
The Tres Rios Festival has something for everyone. In the Kids Zone, youngsters of all ages are encouraged to decorate their own walking stick, a souvenir they can take home. A basic birding area allows them to use binoculars to spot and identify local birds. Train rides and a perennial favorite pony ride rounded out their activities, but sometimes all a kid needs is a pile of sand. For those who dream of catching that lunker, there was plenty of free fishing to go around. Parents, grandparents, and kids alike took advantage of this great opportunity to spend some quality time or to just drown a worm or two.
There you go.
There you go, baseball.
And let's not forget food. Vendors supplied plenty of local favorites to whet the appetite and delight the senses. One of the big draws at this year's festival was to experience the joy of paddling a canoe around the small lake at the wildlife area. Paddlers enjoyed the serenity of being on the water, getting close to birds and animals, and generally enjoying the great weather and natural surroundings. Keep a sharp lookout on the shoreline and you might catch a glimpse of a least bittern grabbing a bite of lunch. Of course, some people opted for a wetter version of fun. And Phil, if you don't stop splashing the girls, you'll end up in the water too. Getting around the festival was no problem. Hay wagons traveled around the sites every couple of minutes.
Oh, that's awesome. So you will really get a big benefit out of this gift card, won't you?
Yeah.
Are you excited?
Among the festival's unique activities was the search for America's next top recycling model. The idea was to show off this season's trashiest outfit created from recyclable materials. Open to all children in kindergarten through 6th grade, contestants wowed the audience with unique and creative apparel. This year's winner stole the crowd's hearts with his unique entry.
Bottles here, each bottle, okay?
And for wildlife enthusiasts and birdwatchers, in-depth classes on identifying those tricky sparrows, impressive wetland birds, and our unique southwestern avifauna were a big hit among participants.
We're the Back Porch Bandits. Thank you very much.
And that's our show for this evening. If you have questions about anything you saw on the show, go to our website at azgfd.gov. On behalf of producers Gary Schaefer and Carol Lind, I'm your host Jim Harkin. Thanks for watching.